I recorded this video before I started playing the game, but I know there is no way you'd be able to tell.
Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a game I have not played. That'll probably change at some point, but it's also not totally relevant to this video. I'm not here to speak to its quality or whether or not it deserved to platinum the Game Awards. I'm here because there's been a little rumbling as of late about its use of generative AI. For those not in the know, shortly after Expedition 33's launch, AI-generated textures were discovered in the game's starting area, and also here, that's not at the game's starting area, but I didn't know that when I wrote this script. Once the developer, Sandfall Interactive, was made aware, the aforementioned textures were immediately patched out of the game within its first week of release. Now, I am firmly in the anti-AI camp. I've been saying for years that the only people excited about it are those who don't understand the technology. I'll link a few videos in the description that represent my perspective pretty well. I am wholeheartedly of the belief that this technology has no place in the future of art. I imagine it is easy to assume upon hearing me say that I would summarily write off Expedition 33 as AI slop, the YouTube Shorts of gaming, if you will. This is not a conclusion I can draw in good faith. Furthermore, I would argue that the outrage I've seen expressed towards Sandfall, righteous as it may be on paper, is at best misplaced and at worst performative and consciously misleading. I sincerely believe that nobody who is up in arms about this has actually researched the situation, and by the end of this video, you will understand why.
On the day of the premiere, Sandfall Interactive did in fact confirm that Gen AI was used in the making of Expedition 33. Despite agreeing that no Gen AI was used in the making of the game when it was submitted to us for consideration, unfortunately that's not the case.
I'm going to address what I would consider to be the most reasonable argument against Clair Obscur first, that being the Indie Game Awards. Expedition 33 was named Game of the Year at the Indie Game Awards ceremony on December 18th, 2025, but its award was quickly rescinded due to it being in violation of the organizers' No AI rule. According to an unnamed Sandfall representative interviewed by the IGA staff, no AI was used in the development of Expedition 33. This is a little weird. Obviously, the statement is untrue. Gen AI use was explicitly confirmed by Francois Maurice, a Sandfall producer, in an interview with Al Pais, which was published on July 19th, 2025. So the question then comes up, how did this go under the radar? Unpatched AI textures were discovered in April and openly discussed in July. We don't know the specifics of the conversation that was had in that submission interview, and we don't know how close the representative was to the game's development. This statement is all we know, and I fully acknowledge that this is my weakest rebuttal, but I urge you to consider that it could very well be possible that the Sandfall guy had no idea, given how small a role AI was stated to have played. It just doesn't logically add up to me that they would intentionally say something so easy to disprove, even if they were consciously lying, which I'm not denying is a possibility, mind you. I think a level of accountability still falls on the Indie Game Awards for not having done their due diligence in verifying what they'd been told. Obviously, the Indie Game Awards are well within their rights to disqualify Clair Obscur for violating their rules, but this interview was publicly available for the better part of half of the year. It shouldn't have been eligible from the start. This is on the same level as the Oscars not requiring Academy members to actually watch the movies they're voting on until this year. I just love award shows, man. They're so good. Taking a closer look at the AI content itself, I noticed something that a lot of people covering this drama seem to neglect. The poster is completely illegible. It's so strange to me that people are saying that Sandfall only removed the textures because they got caught. Things make it through QA in even the most polished games. That's what the report bug feature is for. I really don't think they were meant to have the chromacopia shipping container in Dexter Original Sin, but Tyler the Creator is now canonically a part of this universe since the 1970s. Look at it again. Does this really look like it was intended to be the final texture? This is at the start of the game, where world-building details like this arguably matter the most. Why would Sandfall include this as part of Clair Obscur's introduction unless to imply that the written language of French is now Arabesh? A lot of developers do placeholder art in different ways. It makes sense that someone would argue in the Big 25 or the Gigantic 26 that AI being somebody's go-to would be a little odd at best. With that being said, I think it's disingenuous to ignore game director Guillaume Broche's comment when asked directly about it in an interview with small YouTube creator Sushi, in which he said, "When AI first came out in early 2022, we'd already started developing the game. It was a new tool. We tried it and we didn't like it at all. It felt wrong. We had originally used it as a placeholder for textures we missed, but we took it out as soon as we found it." Of course, somebody saying something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. However, I'm willing to take Broche at his word, given that these are the only textures that have been replaced, and that the statement tracks with what had already been confirmed back in July. These textures being from 2022 also explains why they look this shit. Consistent text is something that generative AI has always struggled with, but this is far too primitive to be from a recent model. I think it's important to mention that the environmental impact of generative AI is something that's only been brought into the public eye relatively recently. Anecdotally, I'd only started hearing murmurings about it in mid-2024 and seeing real in-depth breakdowns only this past year. It's unfair, in my opinion, to judge Sandfall based on our current knowledge, seeing as how the AI content was generated nearly 4 years ago. So, what is the point of this video? Was this just me trying to justify my purchase? Do I just think AI games are a complete non-issue? Am I secretly an AI bro going behind enemy lines to desensitize my 900 subscribers to the enshittification of the entertainment industry?
Yeah, guys, that Coca-Cola ad was really cool and didn't look like complete dog shit. The perspective on those trucks was correct.
I think at least part of my thesis should be glaringly obvious at this point, but let me explain the whole thing. When your first reaction to something is to jump to moral panic and not examine the subject beyond the surface level, you are working against your own cause. This is textbook anti-intellectualism. If you shut down any discussion of nuance in favor of preserving your perception of your own moral backbone, you only discredit your side of the argument. I don't think generative AI belongs in art of any kind, and I believe Expedition 33 is better off without it. But what Reddit's greatest minds seem to ignore is that this is the same conclusion that Sandfall came 2 years ago. AI tools like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney were these hot new toys everybody was trying out in 2022. I don't think it's totally fair to judge the dev team for giving it the old college try, especially given that they organically decided that it wasn't of much use to them. But instead of throwing it all in the trash like they probably should have, they let a couple textures stay with the intent of replacing them, but forgot about them until they were found after the game's release. In a vacuum, that's not a great look. But after examining the context and reading between the lines, I would confidently call this situation completely inconsequential, moreover a distraction from real issues. Condemning a relatively small dev team for giving a new technology an earnest try, who would themselves write it off before even knowing the consequences it has, helps nobody except arguably the Gen AI crowd, because you're drowning out valid criticism of how the technology is being abused. Pushing back against AI taking over the entertainment space is nothing short of an obligation for any who have even a shred of respect for the arts. But that pushback needs to be directed toward the perpetrators who are actively going out of their way time and time again to make everything worse. Here's a few other things that I want to mention. There is a good bit of speculation on my part in this video. I don't claim to have some deep insider knowledge of Sandfall's intentions, and it's entirely possible that something that goes against my conclusion will come out in the future. I am of the impression that this won't happen, but on the off chance it does, I'll be sure to address it. I'd also originally planned on this video covering Larian Studios in a bit more depth because of the news around them using AI tools, but there isn't as much information about it, and what's been stated really just sounds like they're using ChatGPT as a search engine. I'm personally not gonna throw stones their way or write off Divinity for that unless something more substantial happens. And finally, for the sake of transparency, I have used generative AI exactly one time for this channel. It was in the End of Evangelion video when I introduced my friend Austin, who is the real star of this channel. It was a reference to that one guy on Twitter who would race swap people.
Here's what you would look like if you were black or Chinese.
I thought the joke was so funny that I asked Austin to record his first watch of the video purely so I could see his reaction to this part.
Here's what he would look like if he were black or Chinese. Now, we both love watching.
I don't regret this per se, take that how you will, but I wouldn't do it again. I wasn't aware of how detrimental AI data centers were at the time. Again, it's a totally isolated incident. This is the end of the video.
Oh, it's black or Chinese?